So I was looking over some of all of your material before this, and I really liked one thing that Dr. Katz said about how when people come from the outside to learn about health, what they often see are debates over smaller points, and it's a little bit alienating for the average person who's trying to learn something. And so the format of these roundtable think tank discussions is more of a search for consensus. One of the things we'd like to discuss first it would be what are some of the foundations of a healthy diet and lifestyle, and how do we get that message to more of the public. But first, thank you all for attending. You're really high-level, distinguished guests, and I know you're involved in a lot of research and very prolific writers as well, so maybe if you could each tell briefly some of the projects and publications that you're involved in now, and then we can get started. I guess we can go from left to right, starting with Dr. Ornish.
Sure. I'm Dr. Dean Ornish. I'm a clinical professor of medicine at University of California, San Francisco, and the founder and president of the nonprofit Preventive Medicine Research Institute. And for the last 38 years or so, I've directed a series of studies showing for the first time that these simple changes in diet and lifestyle can not only help prevent, but even reverse the progression of the most common chronic diseases. And sometimes the field is now known as lifestyle medicine, which is lifestyle as treatment, not just to help prevent disease, either in combination with drugs and surgery or often as an alternative to them. And so we're able to show that we could reverse first heart disease within just a few days to a few weeks. The chest pain goes away, the blood flow to the heart improves. After a year, even severely clogged arteries become measurably less clogged, even more improvement after 5 years and after 1 year. And then we found that these same lifestyle changes that could reverse heart disease and reverse type 2 diabetes, and they actually work better than drugs at both preventing and in treating type 2 diabetes. We can stop and even reverse the progression of men with early stage prostate cancer with these same lifestyle changes. We also found that when you change your lifestyle, it changes your genes, turning on the good genes and turning off the bad genes, particularly the genes that cause inflammation, oxidative stress, and what are called oncogenes that promote prostate, breast, and colon cancer can be shut down, over 500 of them in just 3 months. And then more recently we found that these same lifestyle changes could actually begin to reverse the aging process at a cellular level by lengthening what are called telomeres. Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn was awarded the Nobel Prize for her pioneering work in this area. And she did studies on our patients and found that their telomeres got longer. It's actually the only intervention, even drugs haven't been shown to do that in a controlled study. And as our telomeres get longer, our lives get longer, and the risk of premature death from pretty much everything goes up. And then finally we found, I thought if we just did good science that would change medical practice, and to some degree it did. But so that set me on a 16-year journey with Medicare to cover our program, and a couple of years ago they actually began providing Medicare coverage for 72 hours of lifestyle training. And we're now training hospitals and clinics around the country. Now that Medicare is paying for it, most of the other insurance companies are covering it, and so we're really trying to create a new paradigm of healthcare rather than sick care that's really based on these, we often think that it has to be a new drug, a new laser, something really high-tech and expensive. And in our research, we're using these very high-tech, state-of-the-art measures to prove how powerful these very simple and ancient combinations of lifestyle changes can be. And I want to end by just saying for now that it's not like there was one set of lifestyle recommendations for reversing heart or preventing heart disease, reversing and preventing diabetes, prostate cancer, genes, aging, etc. It was really the same for all of them. And the more you change, the more you improve. And so what my distinguished colleagues, Dr. Katz and Fuhrman, I'd love to hear them talk about is that even with all the controversy around what constitutes an optimal diet, I think that once you get past the headlines, and people like controversy, it sells magazines, it gets people to come to websites and so on. But there's really an emerging consensus about what constitutes a healthy way of eating and living. And let me defer to them so that they have a chance to talk. Thank you.
Dr. Katz?
Oh, thanks. I thought from where I sit, Joel was ahead of me, but thank you. Well, it's just terrific to be on with Dean and Joel. We're clearly all compatriots in the same mission, and it really is all about lifestyle as medicine. And Dean, I have to say, is one of my heroes, and I think all of us in lifestyle medicine feel that way, because as he described, first of all, he's done really groundbreaking science. And ultimately, you know, we need to be scientists. This isn't just about cheerleading. This can't be about, hey, we think this is a terrific idea. You know, keep the faith but get the data. And so, you know, we're all really beholden to people who publish studies that prove the principle. Dean is in the vanguard of those. Thankfully, he's not alone. And if you look really at the volume of literature making the case that lifestyle is the best medicine we've got for reversing disease, preventing disease. But let's forget about disease for a second. You know, I mean, it's really all about the prize. And the prize, I would say, is the combination of longevity and vitality, adding years to lives and adding life to years. You know, there is no pill for that. Living well can do that. And the evidence is absolutely incontrovertible. And of course, there are many studies, many kinds of studies that attest to this. But it would be lovely, for example, if today, as the fourth guest, we had on another friend of ours, Dan Buettner, whose work is described as the blue zones, for no better reason than when they were describing those populations around the world that routinely live to be 100, they happened to have a blue Sharpie, and they circled them on a map with a blue Sharpie, and so we all got blue zones. But the blue zones are a beautiful testimony to, I think, the very reason you brought us together today, and that idea of common ground. So here we've got 5 very distinct populations that have been well characterized by Dan and his colleagues at National Geographic as having everything we all want: long life, vitality, and then a very peaceful exit more often than not. They go to sleep one night at age 100 and just don't wake up. That, my friends, is a consummation devoutly to be wished. To live long, prosper, and then go gentle into that good night, it just doesn't get any better than that. So I think we are all advocates for blue zones into blueprints so that more people can enjoy those blessings. I mean, those really are the great blessings of life: a long, vital life, doing the things you want to do. Healthy people have more fun, and we're all fighting for that. And you know, inevitably, when you bring on any group of experts who devoted their whole career and all their passion to these things, you know, we all have our niche. We all have the thing that we feel most passionately about. But since Dean passed the baton, and you know, Joel will have a particular spin on this, I will say that, you know, if we're talking about lifestyle as medicine, by and large, what we mean is eating well, being active, avoiding toxins, in particular tobacco, but also excess alcohol, getting enough sleep, mitigating stress, loving relationships, strong social connections. I call them feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, and love. There are other characterizations. Some people put in spirituality. I would say, you know, love can be love of God, love of other people, love of purpose in life. But in any event, same basic formula, we just use different terminology. The only really controversial one on the list, I think, is diet. And I would argue that Michael Pollan pretty much nailed it in 7 words. Food, not too much, mostly plants. So real food, nothing that glows in the dark, food direct from nature. You know, there's a case to be made for eating only plants, but frankly, you know, health outcomes are just as good in those blue zone populations that have Mediterranean diets that are omnivorous. And so, you know, I would argue there's a theme we all absolutely agree on, and then there are variations on the theme, and we all maybe have a favorite. But I think the beauty for the population at large, and for today's purposes, as long as you're on that theme, you're moving in the direction of the blue zone blessings. And the power of lifestyle as medicine is affirmed by studies done by Dean and many others. We really know from the work of, for example, Bill Faggy and Mike McGinnis going back over 20 years, that fully 80% of the premature deaths in the United States every year, and much of the burden of chronic disease, is directly attributable to bad use of our feet, our forks, and our fingers. You know, if we didn't smoke, ate well, and were physically active, and got a few other things right, close to 8 times in 10, all the really horrible stuff that happens to people we love, heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, dementia, doesn't need to happen. And what a magnificent prize it would be to bequeath to our children and grandchildren that world. So you ask what we're doing about it. You know, we're all doing variations on the same theme. We're studying it. We're developing programs to help share those blessings. In my case, at the Prevention Research Center at Yale, we design studies to test practical interventions. We study interventions for schools, work sites, churches, supermarkets. And then really the particular focus of my career at this point is the very thing you're doing with us today, and that is bringing people together. So we're launching the True Health Initiative this fall, and I'm honored to say that both Dean and Joel are members of the Council of Directors here, and the goal simply is to show the world at large that despite all the disagreements they hear about every day in USA Today and on Good Morning America, because as Dean says, controversy and discord sell magazines, sell books, sell airtime. Despite all of that, there really is a massive global consensus about the fundamentals of healthy living among people who really know what they're talking about. And frankly, I suspect Dean, Joel, and I, and most other experts you could have on here, we eat and live more like one another than any of our lifestyle patterns looks like the typical American. And we want more company. That's what we're working to achieve. We want more people deriving the benefits of living well.
And Dr. Fuhrman?
Well, hi. I'm really happy to be here today, and pleasure to be speaking with Dr. Katz and Dr. Ornish. Real pleasure for me. I have to say to start out that I've been a board-certified family physician for more than 25 years. And I've seen tens of thousands of patients in a busy medical practice for many, many years. I've had some, from very successful PBS television shows and about 5 New York Times best-selling books. So I've had a very great opportunity and blessed with being able to spread a message out to the population and affect the health of thousands, maybe even hundreds of thousands of people. So I'm really been so thrilled to have a positive effect on people's lives. I'd like to, add a couple of things, maybe with some more specifics in my findings, and more specific to add to what Dr. Katz was saying also. And that number one, we're talking here about that people don't have to die of heart attacks and strokes. We can protect ourselves against dementia, and we can win the war on cancer. So we're talking about, and we can extend human lifespan dramatically, and we can also have a better quality of life in our later years. So we have a unique opportunity in human history today where people can do much better than we've done for the last 50 years in America. We can really get rid of the healthcare crisis, and we have this opportunity to have great health and help many people. So that's tremendously positive thing. I've got tremendous satisfaction in putting Dr. Ornish's advice over the years into practice with people, with thousands of people in my practice, seeing them get well. But I've also seen people with lupus get better. I've also seen people with psoriasis reverse their psoriasis. I've seen people with asthma get well. I've seen people with chronic daily headaches go away. I've helped people with fibromyalgia. In other words, it's not just losing weight, reversing heart disease and diabetes here. It's that most of the chronic, considered irreversible conditions that people are suffering with are more effectively treated with lifestyle medicine and nutritional excellence, and that it affords people the opportunity to get away from dangerous drugs and surgeries, which can really weaken their life and weaken their longevity. So I just want to say that lifestyle medicine is more effective than conventional drug-based medicine, and even though Dr. Ornish's research is historical and so important, we continue to need further research to show the other avenues at which nutritional excellence can be applied, so doctors can even more utilize this information into their practices. So that said, I did just have a study that I just finished with a survey about 500 people, and it's accepted for publication in the American Journal of Lifestyle Medicine, but it's not published yet. And it showed that the average person following this heavy natural food, plant-rich approach dropped their systolic blood pressure by an average of 25 millimeters of mercury in this study. And that compares to the DASH diet, where the average participant drops their blood pressure about 10 millimeters mercury. In other words, we saw cardiac reversal, we saw a tremendous drop in cholesterol, we saw tremendous long-term success in body weight dropping, and we saw dramatic blood pressure effects that can't be rivaled by medication. Because normalizing your blood pressure with diet and exercise and lifestyle medicine gives you much better outcome and long-term prognosis than using medication to drop your blood pressure. They're completely not equals. So I wanted to say those things, and I also wanted to put some specifics on what Dr. Katz was saying, in that I have three things that I think all of us would agree on, but I also think that the majority of nutritional scientists that are informed around the world would also agree with. So let me state those three things and see if we all agree. Number one, we all recognize that a diet should be predominantly and be rich in natural plant foods like fruits and vegetables, beans, nuts and seeds, mushrooms, onions, berries, tomatoes, peppers, and others. We think our diet should consist of colorful and an assortment of plants. Number two, we all recognize that highly refined and processed foods, especially high glycemic carbohydrates, are a disease risk, and they don't just increase the risk of obesity and diabetes and heart disease, but they also increase the risk of cancer. And I think that we can pretty much all agree on that. And one of the reasons why there's been so much press that maybe saturated fat isn't so bad is really only because they compared it to most of the studies were compared to eating worse things like processed carbohydrates, highly refined carbohydrates, which got even worse outcomes. And number three, that the American diet and most of the modern world is eating way too many animal products in their diet, and that the amount of animal products has to be dramatically curtailed to much lower amounts. That doesn't mean that we're in all agreement on exactly what an amount is, but we all could recognize that the 30% of animal products Americans are eating today is much higher than what we would require for people even to achieve a normal lifespan. And I've kind of made a graph, and I've said that that of course we're going to take in other factors. It's not all about animal products, but since we're in so much agreement that processed foods and highly glycemic carbohydrates like sugar is so bad, I can target in or focus in on the animal products because that's the area where there's more controversy, where across the board where people are generally agreeing about processed carbohydrates. So let me just say that I'm suggesting that to see predictable disease reversal from serious chronic disease, we generally have to see animal products go between that 0 to 5% figure. For disease protection, for people to lower the risk of disease, potentially it could be between that 5% and 15% for most people with reasonable genetics, but it's still not going to be the ideal to be in the 10 to 20% range. But once you see a diet style where people are eating above 15% of calories from animal products, you generally see a large segment of that population at higher risk of developing serious chronic diseases. And once you see a population eating above 25%, you almost see cancers, heart attacks, and strokes ubiquitously in that population. So I just have to say that this is soft science, but we have a lot of evidence, including one study published in the British Medical Journal in 2012, following 43,000 women for 15 years, showing that as people better adhere to a diet with less carbohydrate, less refined carbohydrate, and more animal products, in a dose-dependent manner, their disease of death and mortality rate went up accordingly. And the opposite was true on a 1 to 20 scale, that people who approached that diet with more animal products, meaning above 16 to 20, had a 60% increased risk of mortality. And the study has been corroborated by many other studies, including a study of about 85,000 women and 44,000 men published in the Annals of Internal Medicine 2010, showing that this low carbohydrate, high animal product modeling had a 23% increase of overall death when followed for an average of 25 years. And those that modeled a more vegetable-based, lower animal food diet had a 20% decreased risk of overall death. So that's a 43% difference in death rate between those two extremes. So I'm saying that there's the clinical evidence. There's the experience of doctors of lifestyle medicine like myself. There's the research being done by people around the world. There's the historical research that Dr. Ornish has done to show how applicable this is to telomeres and prostate cancer and heartache reversal. In other words, we have tremendous opportunity to impact people. And the problem is that there's a tremendous amount of, how you could say, interference with getting this message out, and that interference comes with food preferences, economic people's businesses of selling food, what people prefer to eat, other dietary models that people are invested in. So it's really, I'm agreeing with everything that's said, and that there's tremendous agreement among scientists and the preponderance of evidence here is becoming overwhelming.
Can I jump in here?
Yes, thanks.
Sure.
So first, again, I just want to add my acknowledgement and respect to my two colleagues, and what they said was beautiful, is beautiful. And just to build on that, you know, when people are watching this, I just want to come back to making it simple, because it is really simple. And you know, in my experience, people who really understand something can make it simple, not out of ignorance, but because they really spend their whole life doing it. Steve Jobs was often quoted as saying that he was more proud of what he left out of the iPhone than what he put in it, so that you could really have what really matters most without getting distracted by all the other things. And when I chaired Google Health with Marissa Mayer from 2007 to 2009, I said, you know, we really need to make this, before she went on to chair Yahoo, so we really need to make this simple. We're making this too complicated. And in a very simple way, what we've learned is that the more you change your lifestyle, the more you improve, both in how you feel and in every way that we can measure, at any age, which is an incredibly empowering message. You know, when I began doing this work, I thought the younger people who had less severe disease would do better, but I was wrong. It wasn't how old they were, it wasn't how sick they were. The more you change, the more you improve. And part of the problem is that the whole language of behavioral change, and diet in particular, has this somehow gotten this kind of judgmental, moralistic, kind of wagging your finger quality. You know, we call foods good foods or bad foods. Once you call foods good or bad, it's a very small step to saying I'm a bad person because I ate bad food, and all the shame and guilt, you know, that goes around that, which really are toxic for you. And diets are all about what you can't have and what you must do. Did you lose my picture, by the way?
It's back.
Okay, thank you. Diets are all about what you can't have and what you must do. And sooner or later, I've just learned that most people, even more than being healthy, want to feel free and in control. And as soon as I tell somebody, eat this and don't eat that, and do this and don't do that, they just want to do the opposite. It's not only helpful, it's often counterproductive. So I wrote a book called The Spectrum, which was based on the finding that the more you change, the more you improve. And so instead of calling foods, these are good foods and these are bad foods, foods are just foods, but some foods are healthier than others. And so group 1 are the healthiest foods, group 5 are the least healthy. So when someone comes to see me, I'll say, instead of saying, here's your diet, I say, what are you eating now? Oh, well, I'm eating mostly unhealthy group 5 foods. And then I say, well, here's what you should do. Say, how much are you willing to change? I say, oh, no one's really ever asked me that before. And what are your goals? What are you trying to accomplish? Well, I want to lose 10 pounds, get my blood pressure down, get off these drugs, get my cholesterol down, get my blood sugar down, whatever it happens to be. And then I'll say, okay, well, how much are you willing to change? Well, I'm not ready to go all the way to be a vegetarian, as Dr. Fuhrman said, but I'll eat less of the unhealthy groups 4 and 5 foods and more of the healthier group 1 and 3. Great. And again, it's not just dieting. It's eat well, stress less, move more, and love more. So I'll say, how much stress management, how much yoga and meditation are you doing? Did you lose our picture again here?
No, you're still in the main screen.
How much yoga and meditation are you doing? Well, 0. How much are you willing to do? Not here's what you should be doing. Oh, I don't know, I'll meditate 10 minutes a day. Great. How much exercise are you getting? Well, not enough, but I'll walk 20 minutes a day. And how much love and support do you have in your life? Well, not enough, but I'll make that more of a priority. And great, and we'll track it, and we'll support that degree of change. And after a month, let's say they wanted to lose 10 pounds, and they lost 6, or they wanted to get their LDL down 50 points, and it came down 30. You say, look, you're moving in the right direction. You know, if you just go a little farther, if you indulge yourself one day, it doesn't mean you cheated or you failed or you're bad. Just eat healthier the next. You don't have time to exercise one day, do a little more the next. You don't have time to meditate for an hour, do it for a minute. Whatever you do, there's a corresponding benefit. And I just find that that approach it's a much more compassionate approach. There's no diet to get on, so there's no diet to get off. You can't fail. It's a much more sustainable approach. And I've also found that if it's meaningful, that it's sustainable. And so if you tell somebody, oh, you can't eat this and you have to eat that, they start to feel deprived, and being deprived is not a sustainable state. If you feel pleasure, if you feel love, those are things that are sustainable. And just the act of choosing not to eat something that you otherwise could do imbues it with great meaning. If you say, I feel deprived because I can't eat everything I want, that's not going to work. If you say, I'm choosing not to eat certain foods because what I gain is so much more than what I give up. I think more clearly, I feel better, I have better sex, I can play with my grandkids because I don't have chest pain anymore. I can You know, I want to watch my kids grow up. I want to dance at their wedding. You know, those kinds of things. What you gain is more than what you give up. That makes it sustainable. And you know, and if it's meaningful, then it's sustainable. So I want to get away from this idea, you know, am I going to live longer? Is it just going to seem longer? All these false choices. That because these underlying biological mechanisms are so dynamic, when you make these changes, and to the degree you make them, you're likely to feel so much better so quickly. It reframes the whole reason for making these changes from fear of dying or fear of something bad happening to joy and pleasure and feeling good and all the things that really make life worth living.
Gang, if I may, I want to pick up on a couple of things that Joel said, and something that none of us has said yet. So Joel referred to how obvious it is that we should not eat highly refined carbohydrates, you know, sugar sweetened. I mean, think of a glow-in-the-dark glazed donut. You know, I mean, we run on the very foods we ought to be running from, basically, in America. America runs on the foods we all ought to be running from, screaming. We all agree on that. But he mentioned that, you know, animal products, we should all eat less. Totally agree. How much less, there's disagreement. And I've heard all three of us talk about the planet. We love this planet. You know, we can talk about blue zones and people and all that, but this beautiful blue planet of ours, you know, I mean, it's a jewel in the crown of the cosmos, and we're inclined to keep it that way. And I think more and more people are thinking along those lines. And, you know, talking about common ground here, there really is a beautiful synergy between the things that we want to do to promote human health and the things that are necessary to preserve biodiversity, conserve scarce resources, in particular water, which is fast becoming, you know, the world's most precious rate-limiting commodity, and we're only going to see more of that with climate change to stabilize the climate, preserve fragile ecosystems. All of this really comes together. The environmental costs of eating animal products are extremely high. The water consumption involved is enormously high. Frankly, that's largely true of highly processed food in general. I just reviewed in Nature Marion Nestle's new book. Dr. Nestle, I think, probably well known to, I don't know who the audience is who's watching us, guys. For all I know, we're just talking to one another, but assuming somebody's out there, if they know us, they probably know Marion. But a professor of nutrition at NYU, wrote a great book years ago, Food Politics. Well, her new book is Soda Politics. And Nature asked me to review that, and that just came out. So I read the book and you know, kind of went through it in considerable detail. But the thing that really jumped out at me is that to produce a gallon or a liter, pick a unit of measurement, of soda, Coca-Cola or Pepsi, requires between 320 and 640 times that volume of water. I mean, that's just insane. So in other words, you know, we could either have 640 gallons of water or 1 gallon of Coca-Cola, and we are choosing the 1 gallon of Coca-Cola. That's just nuts.
Can I just jump in here and say one thing really quick? That's brilliant. And the other thing is that the U.S. Department of Interior said that to make one burger, a third of a pound burger, takes 4,000 to 18,000 gallons of water.
Right, exactly.
Water. You know,
it's insane.
Take a long shower, which is 40 gallons, or a short shower, which is 20.
Yeah, just less meat, right?
So just have a meatless Monday. You can take as long a shower.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly. Amen. So what I was going to say, and again, you know, Joel alluded to the agreement about eating less meat. I just want to throw out there, there's a really nice piece in The Conversation called "Meat is," and I think we could say maybe, a complex health issue, but it's a simple environmental issue. Anybody who cares about the planet should be eating less meat. So that's one thing. The other thing I know all of us care about is family, and when we talk about lifestyle as medicine, and you know, we can all just nod our heads, you know, you're not going to share your prescription drugs with your kids or grandkids, but you can share a healthy lifestyle with all the people you love, and by sharing it, everybody benefits and you all get stronger, because in unity there is strength. And then finally, Joel referred to this issue of saturated fat, and you know, we totally agree that there's been enormous hyperbole and distraction. I just wanted to mention, Joel, in addition to the studies that you cited already, and I'm sure you know this, paper just came out at the beginning of this week, I think it was, in the Journal of the American College of Cardiology, group of researchers at Harvard, all the usual controls, and what they looked at in close to 100,000 people was the question we've all been wanting someone to ask. If people swapped saturated fat out of their diets, what did they eat instead? and then tell us what happened. And these researchers, including our friends Walter Willett and Frank Hugh and others, they did exactly that. And what they found is totally predictable. If people swapped out sources of saturated fat and ate more refined starches and added sugars, it was a lateral move. Their health got no better at all. On the other hand, if they replaced saturated fat calories with whole grains, other whole plant foods, or unsaturated oils, and the sources of those would be nuts and seeds, olives, avocado, and maybe some fish, dramatic improvements in their health. So, really we've been distracted about saturated fat because, the argument, it's not so bad, begs the question, compared to what? Yeah, I mean, compared to cotton candy, it's not so bad. Compared to Coca-Cola, it's not so bad. Compared to actually good food, yeah, it's exactly as bad as we've been telling you.
I'm particularly interested in, you've mentioned the blue zones. Could you go through what they were and what were the commonalities among those diets?
Yeah, and actually, that's the very subject of Dan Buettner's latest book, The Blue Zone Solution. So Dan has written about the blue zones in general and then kind of drilled down what exactly are these people eating. So very briefly, because I'd love to hear more from Joel, but so Dan, an interesting character, not a scientist. He's a long-distance biker and an explorer, as you might expect of a National Geographic fellow who was traveling the world and happened to bump into these populations in his travels where people lived a remarkably long time and seemed to be extraordinarily healthy. And then the team from National Geographic got involved and a more formal ethnographic analysis began, and Dan really has become the messenger about all of this. And so to date, there are 5 blue zones. Frankly, I think they'll find some more. And the 5 are in Ikaria, Greece, Sardinia, Italy, Okinawa, Japan, Loma Linda, California, and the Nicoya Peninsula in Costa Rica. And they all eat food, not too much, mostly plants. They don't smoke. They're physically active. They get plenty of sleep. They're not stressed out. They have a strong sense of community, feet, forks, fingers, sleep, stress, and love every time. They're all on the theme. But really, one of the beautiful things about this ethnographic work, describing real people in the real world, is how much it shows the theme is what matters and how much latitude there is on the theme. Because after all, in Ikaria, Greece, and Sardinia, Italy, they have these traditional high-fat Mediterranean diets. High-fat, yes, but what kind of fat? Well, it's coming from nuts and seeds, olives, avocado, olive oil. They're eating mostly plants, a little bit of meat. They're omnivores, but mostly plant-based diet. They're on the theme. In Okinawa, Japan, it's a low-fat traditional Asian diet. Lots of vegetables, fair amount of rice, very little animal products, essentially no dairy. The Mediterranean populations do include dairy in their diets. In Loma Linda, California, they are Seventh-day Adventists and mostly vegan, so it's all plants, no dairy, no meat. And in Costa Rica, they're omnivores again, including meat and fish. And although they have some whole grains, as all of them do, there's a particular emphasis on a local tuber. So complex starch is a particular portion of their diet. But in all cases, food direct from nature, mostly plants, nothing that glows in the dark. I really think the beauty of this work is that it puts the same spotlight both on what these very diverse populations have in common and what makes them different. And that would argue to Dean's point with the spectrum that we've got options. There is a basic theme of healthy living that really isn't negotiable, but it's a pretty wide lane. And as long as you're on that lane, you've got choices, and you can make choices that are about you and your family that really allow you to get there from here. So I really appreciate that work because it's powerful. It characterizes both the specificity and the variation, and it's real world. A lot of what we do in science, we impose controls. We tend to talk about randomized controlled trials as the best form of evidence. Well, in some ways they are. Some ways they're not. And I say this as a formerly trained epidemiologist. Some ways they're not because the things we do to make them randomized and double-blind and placebo-controlled make them very different from the real world. What we want, I think, is the combination of the two. Randomized controlled trials, experiments where everything's carefully controlled to give very precise answers to very narrowly framed questions. But then we also want to know, hey, when you take off the constraints, will it play in Peoria or Ikaria for that matter? Will it work in the real world? And you want that kind of evidence too. And the Blue Zones work provides that evidence. Yeah,
that was a great summary of Blue Zones. And in full disclosure, Dan is a close personal friend. I just want to clarify, and I know you've said this, but just for people who weren't listening as carefully, that in those blue zones where they eat meat, meat is it's a condiment. It's something used for flavoring. They don't eat it at every meal. It's not like eating meat in the United States or in Western countries.
They don't eat much. I agree, Dean. And the other thing, if we're going to elaborate there, and thank you, it's a very different kind of meat. Right? I mean, in our country, we're talking pepperoni and deli meats, and so it isn't even just meat. It's highly processed meat. So we all know the expression, you are what you eat. I think people who do eat animal products often fail to extend the logic and think, well, what I eat then is what it eats. So if I am going to eat a small amount of meat, if it comes from animals that have lived freely, grazed on a diversity of wild plants, the composition of their flesh is going to be very different than factory farmed animals here in the States.
Have there been epidemiological studies of, say, centenarians in the West and trying to determine how their diets varied compared to the rest of the population?
Those studies are really not very dependable because most people eat so poorly in the West. In other words, then we're going to see genetics play a role, and it's going to be very distorted studies because we study a population as sickly as Americans are. You can't use that data to say, well, what kind of health habits does this person have that are attributing to their long life? It's kind of like throws a monkey wrench into the data because they live so poorly here. Don't forget the American population eats 55% of calories from processed foods and 30% from animal products. We only eat about 5% of calories from colorful produce in this country. But so we're studying sick people. But one thing I wanted to say is that I think I have a little different perspective, and my perspective has been because I guess it's because I see people that are sickly and want to get better. I mostly every day am dealing with people who have advanced diseases and who sometimes willing to eat sawdust to get well. They just want to get well. But my major issue, I think, is the concept of informed consent. Because, you can't ask a person if they want to come off cigarettes or they want to, live on healthy food if they don't know the harm about cigarettes and they don't know the extent to which the food has the effect. In other words, here's what I'm saying. Take drugs for the rest of your life for your high blood pressure, or make a more dramatic shift in the way you're eating. And some people may choose to, well, I'll just take the drugs and eat the way I'm eating. But you know what happens? When we educate that person and we give them fully informed consent and they see that the calcium channel blockers increase the risk of breast cancer, when they see that the pushing the diastolic down to unfavorable level increases the risk of arrhythmia, when we show them the data that taste buds change with time, and that even though the change initially can be stressful in the sense that you may feel a little worse, you may not like the diet as much, but we show them the data that most people who have changed their diet 6 months later, their taste buds have acclimated and they enjoy this diet, or I should say eating healthfully, get as much pleasure out of it as they did eating their more unhealthy diet. And I did publish a study in a journal called Nutrition Journal, where we surveyed about 750 people, showing that their desire to eat healthy and their desire to overeat diminished, and their enjoyment of their diet was proportional to the time to months they spent on eating properly, and also to the amount of education, how informed they were about food and about drugs. In other words, what I'm saying this is that it should be reading, writing, arithmetic, and nutritional sciences. The point I'm making is that the basic information people need to make the right decisions about their life, they don't have that information. They don't have the expertise or the knowledge to make the right choices for their life. And when we do give them that informed consent, when we do educate them sufficiently, when they do spend the time to know what they need to know, there's a higher probability of them making the right decisions and even enjoying that decision more as compared to a person whose doctor told them, you just got to be on these diabetic medications the rest of your life. You got to take these drugs. You're a candidate for angioplasty or bypass surgery. Diet may help a little bit, but it's not really going to do anything. And in other words, I'm suggesting that people aren't given the opportunity to make the right choice because generally their health professionals themselves don't have the expertise and motivational skills to teach and educate and inform the person adequately.
I agree. Let me build on what Joel just said. The reason why, after 38 years of being in this field, that I think our time has finally come for lifestyle medicine and all of us here are founders of that field, is that at the same time there's a perfect storm. You know, the limitations of high-tech medicine are becoming increasingly clear, as Joel and David have been talking about. For example, in cardiology, when I was learning how to do bypass surgery as a medical student with Michael DeBakey, the heart surgeon, he wouldn't even participate in randomized trials. He was so sure that it was helping people. But when you actually look at the randomized trials of bypass surgery and angioplasties and stents, there was a review article in the Journal of in JAMA Internal Medicine where they reviewed the 8 randomized trials of angioplasties and stents in stable patients. And what did they find? They found they don't work. They don't prevent heart attacks. They don't prevent angina. They don't help you live longer. You know, they don't prevent other cardiac events. They don't reduce the need for bypass or unplanned revascularization. And we spent over $80 billion on that, on bypasses and angioplasties that are essentially dangerous, invasive, expensive, and largely ineffective. Now, in somebody who's got, you know, in the middle of a heart attack, that can be life-saving. But that's a very small percentage of people who get these operations. You find the same thing with type 2 diabetes. Today, half of the American population is diabetic or pre-diabetic, at a cost of probably over $3 trillion, according to United Healthcare. Complications of diabetes, any one of which would be awful, are in aggregate truly awful. You know, heart attacks, strokes, blindness, kidney failure, impotence. You know, not good things to have. Amputations, and yet, the Accord study and the Navigator study and the New England Journal of Medicine showed that getting your blood sugar down with drugs, they thought would reduce the complications. They thought would help people live longer. It actually did the opposite. But if you get your blood sugar down with lifestyle changes, you can prevent each and every one of these. It's not like we don't know what to do. We just need to put into practice what we already know. So at the same time that the limitations, and the same is true for men with early-stage prostate cancer. 1 out of 49 men, this is again the New England Journal of Medicine, who have early-stage prostate cancer actually benefit from surgery, radiation, or chemotherapy. And prostate cancer, other than skin cancer, is the most common cancer in men. Now, what happens to the other 48? They usually become we maim them in the most personal ways. They're wearing diapers because they're incontinent. They can't have sex because they're impotent. In 40 out of 49 times, for no benefit, at huge personal costs and huge economic costs. So I think that at the same time, and yet we've shown that in a randomized controlled trial with Dr. Peter Carroll, the chair of urology at UCSF, and the late Dr. Bill Ferrer, who was at the time the chair of urology at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer, that these same simple lifestyle changes can slow, stop, and even reverse the progression of men with early-stage prostate cancer at a fraction of the costs, and the only side effects are good ones. So at the same time that the limitations of high-tech medicine are becoming clear, the power of these low-tech lifestyle interventions is also becoming more well-documented. And as we move into the era of Obamacare, whatever you think about it, it's really turning all the incentives on their ear. So in a more volume-based fee-for-service environment, the more operations you do, the more money you make. Or the more hospitalizations you have, the more money you make if you're a doctor or a hospital or clinic. Now it's more of a bundled payment value than volume-based. Here's X amount of dollars. You, the doctor, the hospital, or clinic, gets to keep what's left over. So now there's more of an incentive to do other approaches that are ultimately going to be more effective. And by the way, let me just end by saying that we did a study with Mutual of Omaha. They found they saved $30,000 per patient in the first year, and Highmark Blue Cross Blue Shield found they cut their overall healthcare costs in half in the first year. So we can make better care available to more people at lower costs, and again, the only side effects are good ones.
I agree with all of that, and obviously we're all members of the Lifestyle Medicine Cheering Committee. But again, I don't know who's listening, and I think it is important to point out that the three of us are formally trained, conventionally trained physicians, have all taken care of patients, and either have moved on to do other things or are still taking care of patients. I suspect, gentlemen, I certainly hope we're all proponents of immunization. And, so I want to be careful, because as we opine about the incredible, the power of lifestyle as medicine, the luminous promise of it, and the incontrovertible fact that it can do for the human condition what no drug can do. And we're absolutely in agreement about that. We don't want to throw conventional medicine under the bus. And I had an interesting experience just at the beginning of this summer. And there are all sorts of unintended harms and maybe at times some profit-driven harms of conventional medicine, clearly. But as with most things in life, there's nuance, baby in bathwater. But it was interesting. I imagine both of you guys know Eddie Phillips at Harvard, another colleague of ours, very active in teaching lifestyle medicine. So I think his signature contribution is developing lifestyle medicine training programs for new folks entering the medical field. Very valuable work, particular focus on physical activity, but not exclusively that. But anyway, Eddie had asked me to keynote a conference they were having at Harvard, and all the usual fanfare was terrific, and there I was, my name up in lights in the middle of the program, and a few days before I was supposed to head up to Boston, I got just horribly sick. I'll spare you the gory details of how it all played out. It was rather interesting. I wrote about it. But long story short, I was ultimately diagnosed with anaplasmosis, which is a tick-borne infection. No surprise, given the part of the country I live in. I'm out in the woods in Connecticut. I've got 3 dogs and a horse. I'm the poster child for tick-borne diseases, so I got one. Apparently compounded by viral meningitis, according to the results of my lumbar puncture. But man, I was sick. So the best we could do with this lifestyle medicine conference at Harvard, we agreed we pushed my talk back a day. And I gave it from my hospital bed where I was receiving intravenous therapy via Skype. And I said, I'm president of the American College of Lifestyle Medicine. I'm all over it. It is the thing. On the other hand, at the moment, I'm pretty thankful for medicine as medicine. So, again, what lifestyle medicine can do, there is no pill, there's nothing in a syringe, there is no technology. The master levers of medical destiny are lifestyle choices that potentially we can all control, although I suspect we'd all agree the playing field of opportunity is not level. The choices anybody makes are subordinate to the choices we have, and our environment can make it extremely difficult to make good choices. Michael Moss, for example, Pulitzer Prize winner, has written beautifully about how the food industry manipulates food to maximize the calories it takes for us to feel full, right? So his New York Times Magazine cover story, The Extraordinary Science of Addictive Junk Food, is a really compelling read. I've recommended it to everyone. So, it's not easy to get there from here. But still, that is the most powerful medicine. It doesn't mean conventional medicine doesn't have a role to play, right? And I think you guys will agree.
I'm glad you clarified that, but certainly nothing that I've said or certainly nothing that I believe would indicate otherwise. I'm a full professor of medicine at UCSF. Drugs and surgery can be life-saving in a crisis. I've been the personal beneficiary of it, as I'm sure all of us have.
Right.
To use the example earlier with prostate cancer, Dr. Peter Carroll is one of the busiest surgeons in the country. And certainly if I needed surgery, that's who I would go to. But what he's been able to do is to very thoughtfully distinguish between maybe that 1 or 2 out of 49 people who can benefit from surgery from the others who don't.
Who don't need it, right.
Carefully, do repeat ultrasounds, use high-tech medicine to really carefully target the therapies to people who can benefit from them, rather than just saying drugs and surgery are good for everyone.
I thought we agreed completely. Yeah, it's just you don't know who's listening, and sometimes.
It reminds me when I was a medical student, I went to India with a spiritual teacher, Swami Satchidananda, who I studied with for many years, and we were looking at all the alternative and naturopathic and Ayurvedic cures and so on, and I got a really horrible case of amoebic dysentery, kind of like you, and I lost 30 pounds. I was, horrible. I tried every alternative remedy, and finally I said, to hell with it. I took an antibiotic. I was well the next day, so I came back from India. It was very healthy.
That's right. Exactly, right. Yeah. So, there's a role for both. Exactly right.
I would like to ask a sort of provocative question before maybe Dr. Fuhrman has a chance to reply. As Dr. Katz is saying, he doesn't know who is listening to this, no? It seems like more or less everybody in the health community agrees on what are the basic principles on having a healthy diet and how to reverse disease or avoid disease. But it seems like all the people who are not into health, the kind of people who usually don't watch videos about health, don't read articles, they have a sort of skeptic attitude, like, I don't care about eating healthy food. I prefer to enjoy the food I like. So are they missing a point? Are there like minor issues beside the most big ones like cancer and diabetes and heart strokes. Are there also other minor diseases like headaches that these people are not understanding are relating so much to diet?
I want to build on what Joel was talking about, and I'll be brief, and then I'll turn it back to him. You know, these are, first of all, it's a myth to say, you know, am I going to live longer, or is it just going to seem longer if I eat unhealthy, you know, or the way to live to be 100 is to not do all the things that make you want to live to be 100. You know, you hear one version of that in various forms. The fact is that, first of all, your palate does adapt. You can make unhealthy food taste bad, or you can make it taste good. You can make really healthy food taste bad or taste good by working with people. You know, great chefs know how to make great food and say work within these guidelines. As he indicated, your palate adapts. Many people have switched from, say, whole milk to low-fat milk, or from high salt to low salt. At first it tastes like, you know, water, the milk does, and then you go out to dinner and suddenly regular milk tastes like cream. Your palate adapts very quickly. You can eat delicious food that's also good for you. But the point is that what you gain is so much more than what you give up. It's not just heart disease and diabetes, migraine headaches, rheumatoid arthritis, osteoarthritis, depression, aches and pains. And again, it's not just diet, but it's all these other factors too that play an important role. And so I want to just make your listeners understand that it's not about, fear is not a sustainable motivator. Changing your diet so that something bad doesn't happen to you years down the road is not sustainable. But because these underlying biological mechanisms are so dynamic, try it for a couple of weeks. And if you really try it, you generally will feel, you think more clearly. Your brain gets so much blood. You think more clearly. You have more energy. You need less sleep. There's a new emerging field called neurogenesis or neuroplasticity. You can actually grow so many new brain neurons in just a month or two that your brain gets measurably bigger. And particularly those parts of your brain that you want to get bigger, like your hippocampus that controls memory. You think more clearly, you remember things instead of saying, like, what was that guy's name, or where did I leave my keys? Suddenly you don't have to, you remember those things better. Your skin gets more blood, so you don't age as quickly. You look better. Your sexual organs get more blood in the same way that Viagra works, so you have better sexual function without needing drugs to do that. And, you know, you lose weight and keep it off, you know. So for all these reasons, these are choices worth making. Yes, you'll probably live longer, but who wants to live longer if you're not having fun? These are changes that can improve the quality of our lives, not just how long we live. Joel, do you want to build on that?
Sure, thanks. I could always just add a couple of things. And one is, you know, I'm agreeing with everything that's said, but it seems that while we're in agreement and doing similar work, the masses out there are still massively confused and getting mixed messages from the media and other people, so they often throw up their hands and say, I don't know what to do because I'm getting so many different messages, number one. And number two, the reality that, as Dr. Katz mentioned earlier, that an unhealthy diet and unhealthy foods are addicting both physically and emotionally. And people need guidance, motivation, and we're in the field of lifestyle medicine. We study how to motivate people, how to educate them, how to help them get over their addictions to cigarette smoking, drug use, pain medication, bad diets, unhealthy eating. And I think that as a whole, we have to pull the rest of society and the majority of medical doctors along a little bit. We have to kind of like nudge them in the direction of lifestyle approaches in developing the skills so we can better motivate people to make the right decisions and inform them with the right information they need to make better decisions and to make it possible for them to make these changes comfortably, pleasurably, and seeing the joy and fun in it, as you are alluding to. That you know, I think that this is the most fun way to live and to eat, and the most tasty way to eat, and the most fun way to live, and I love that I can be in my 60s and still be playing singles tennis and going downhill mogul skiing and be as athletic as I was in my 20s. And I think that this is, you keep your mental faculties, and you were saying some of those benefits, but I'm still that we have still a lot of work. We have a lot of work to do.
For people who don't know you, that you're a former Olympic athlete is worth mentioning as well.
Yeah, figure skating. We checked.
Yeah, I've enjoyed sports, and I still do. And I was on the world figure skating team. I was a pair skater in the early 1970s. But yeah,
we need to go skiing together sometime.
I'll get in touch with you later and tell you maybe we can go ski together.
Can I just build on one thing that you said, Joel, because it's so important. Because so many people who are watching this are in the tech world, or they wouldn't be on Google Hangout probably, or YouTube. And there's so much renewed interest in the paleo diet, which is just kind of an Atkins redux. And I've debated Dr. Atkins many times before he died, and I think what's worth mentioning, there was a wonderful review article that Stephen Smith did in the New England Journal of Medicine, where he looked at what actually happens in your arteries on different diets. Not just, studies compare like one diet to another, say, well, your triglycerides go down more on an Atkins diet, and the LDL goes down more on a plant-based diet. It's kind of a wash, do what you like. But if you actually look at the arteries, on a plant-based diet, the arteries are clean. Typical American diet, they're partially clogged. On an Atkins or now paleo diet, they're severely clogged. And it's not always mediated through your cholesterol or blood pressure. It's through what are called non-traditional risk factors that most non-scientists haven't heard of. TMAO or endothelial-derived growth factor or non-esterified fatty acids, stuff like that. So the bottom line is really what's happening in your arteries, not just what's happening to these risk factors. And it's like night and day. And I just want people to know that. And it's not. So people say, okay, it's all sugar. Well, it's not all sugar. It's not all anything. And as you both indicated, an optimal diet is low in both refined carbs and in animal protein, particularly red meat.
Dean, listen, one of the problems, of course, is once we become known for a particular platform, we say what people expect us to say, and they kind of, yeah, here they go again. I just wanted to mention, I agree with you completely. First of all, paleo, interesting concept, right? I mean, when's the last time you've seen a mammoth? So, all the Stone Age plants and animals that our ancestors ate are extinct. So, they're vague approximations. But I wanted to mention that
another thing.
Yeah, people could hear a really interesting perspective on the distortions of paleo and health effects from someone quite different from us, someone who is an evolutionary biologist. Her name is Marlene Zuck. And she was interviewed by CSPI, Center for Science and the Public Interest, just last week. They published this weekly newsletter, and so this is really great stuff, because here's somebody who's devoted a whole career to evolutionary biology, invited to talk about the paleo diet. What are the myths about it? What are the distortions? And I think if you haven't seen it, you'll enjoy it tremendously. But I find it's really useful, and of course, gentlemen, for bringing us here today, kudos, because that's what you're trying to do. But you brought together three pretty like-minded people. We could have a bigger tent, and again, I just to mention, Joel talked about the confusion out there as a barrier to progress. Absolutely, and if I may, I'll come back to paleo in a second. But I often make the point as we're talking about this consensus among leaders in lifestyle medicine of how luminous the prize truly is. And how personal, because I suspect every one of us here today, just this little group, loves somebody who has been affected directly by heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, dementia. We'd be a very unusual group if that weren't the case. So when we talk about an 80% reduction in the global burden of chronic disease, it's not a remote thing about some anonymous public. It's about you, and it's about me, and it's about everybody listening. We would all feel it. So we've had the knowledge for literal decades about how to prevent up to 80% of chronic disease. We've all got literal skin in the game, the skin of people we love. Sort of begs the question, why isn't this the norm? Why do we eat so badly, as Joel was describing? And he's absolutely right. And so I've compared this to the lunar mission, and I've said, look, we've got our footprints and the American flag on the moon. And we have those things on the moon for three reasons, and as far as I can tell, only three reasons. We wanted to go. Our president encouraged us, but we wanted to go. We had motivation. We wanted to go. We are a very ingenious and rather pertinacious species, so when we want something badly enough, we tend to make it happen. But the third critical thing was we knew where to find the damn thing, right? There was no endless debate about which is the real moon, and my moon can beat your moon, and don't go over there, I think it's over here. And we could have bogged down for decades, never sent anybody up there because we're still bickering about where to find it. Healthy living is exactly like that. It's a lunar landing. It's the lunar landing of public health. It's just this incredible milestone, and we do know where it is, but we can't convince the public we know where it is, and it doesn't matter how loudly I shout or Joel shouts or Dean shouts, because there's so much noise in the world. But if we all shout together, and if we invite all of our colleagues and they shout with us, and even if we reach across aisles and invite our paleo colleagues who say, as we think about the health of people and a population of 7 billion and the planet, we're with you too. Real food, not too much, mostly plants. We still reserve the right to eat venison, but mostly we're with you guys. And then all of a sudden we have the chance, just like the Who's in Horton Hears a Who, to rise above the background noise and be heard. And that is the project that I'm working on. And again, I'm privileged to have both Joel and Dean involved. This True Health Initiative will become a visible and active entity this fall. And that's really its sole purpose, is to try and first convince the rank and file in the healthcare professions and in journalism that there is this massive global consensus that's being obscured by profiteering interests. And then via them, via healthcare professionals and USA Today and the New York Times and the Huffington Post, and what did the True Health Initiative have to say about this study and that study, really try to create this repetitive drumbeat of the same information about the very fundamentals of healthy living we've been discussing. I agree with Joel. It's a huge problem. There is massive confusion. I think there's a little bit of collusion, too, because as long as people pretend they're confused, I mean, I think everybody really knows that broccoli is good for them, but as long as they pretend they're confused, they have an excuse to keep going to Burger King or drinking Coca-Cola. So there's a bit of confusion, there's a bit of collusion, and I think we need a new kind of signal to fix that and rally the troops, because, you know, again, we got to the moon. I think we can get to healthy living for a lot more people, and you know, we want to see that happen. We've devoted our careers to this, and however many patients each of us has seen, it's a drop in the bucket. You know, we can work hard all day in a clinical office for decades and not reach a fraction of the people we could through a cultural commitment to lifestyle-less medicine, and that requires a culture change, and that requires a change in thinking and removing the confusion and denying the opportunity for collusion. And all of a sudden everybody's saying, okay, we know exactly where the prize is. I want it. I want it for my children. I want it for my grandchildren. I want it for the people I love. Now I'm rolling up my sleeves and I'm going to ask the question I should have been asking years ago. How do we get there from here? And when enough of us are asking that question, it's going to happen.
Yeah, and just to clarify a point, I think that was eloquently stated and probably a good note to end on. But, you know, it's not low-fat versus low-carb. You know, having been, you know, positioned as the low-fat guy, it's so much more than that. Right. And the animal protein itself, it's, you know, independent of fat and carbs. There's increasing evidence that it makes a huge difference in our health and our well-being. So I think we need to, you know, find common ground. You know, with the paleo and Atkins diets, for example, we agree that Americans eat too many refined carbs and high fructose corn syrup and white flour and white rice and things. It's really where you go from there. Going to a meat-based diet is generally not the way to go. Going to more fruits and vegetables in their natural forms is really, you know, a much better choice. But again, it's I think we all share the goal of finding the truth, empowering people with information that can transform their lives. And I want to just say I'm grateful for the chance to be here today, so that hopefully that at least some of this information can be helpful to those who've been watching it. So thank you.
It's a honor.
Thank you all so much for attending. I think there were a lot of really good points made. Thank you all so much for spreading this message.
You too.
Thank you, guys. It was fun.
Thank you, too.
Take care, gentlemen. Bye-bye now.